que hemos tomado la decisión de establecer relaciones diplomáticas con la República Popular de China.
The President of Panama announced the establishment of diplomatic relations with China on June 13th. The two governments signed a joint communique in Beijing, and Panama will support the One China policy and sever all official relations with Taiwan. Why has Panama taken this step at this time? Relations between Panama and Taiwan have always been taken seriously by the Taiwan Authority, and Panama was the first country that Tsai Ing-wen chose to visit. How important is Panama to Taiwan? Among the 20 countries which have official relations with Taiwan, 11 are Latin American and Caribbean countries. Will this cause a domino effect in switching diplomatic relations from Taipei to Beijing? China is the second largest country using the Panama Canal, and the Bank of China has set up the largest cross-border RM Latin America and Caribbean countries in Panama. What benefits can this diplomatic relationship bring to both sides and the region at large?
Panama has cut long-standing diplomatic ties with Taiwan and established relations with Chinese mainland instead. The government said it recognized there was only one China and that it considers Taiwan part of it. This communique not only promotes a new stage for China-Panama relations, but may also influence Sino-Latin American relations as a whole. The newly established diplomatic ties between Panama and China are a heavy blow to the administration of Tsai Ing-wen, and it seems likely that where Panama has gone, other Latin American countries may follow. To discuss these issues and more today, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Zhong Houtao, Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and anatomist. We shall also speak to Joanna Lei, a former legislator in Taiwan, via telephone. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Gentlemen, Panama has cut long-standing diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. What do you make of this dramatic move? Will lead to more radical gestures by the Tsai Ing-wen administration to move towards independence?
I think as Panama is just to make this choice on its own interest. Even about 8 years ago, in 2009, Panama decided to embrace Chinese mainland. But at that time, the mainland was quite cautious. It did not want to harm the cross-strait relationship. So at that time, Chinese mainland decided to be much self-restrained. But now the situation has changed totally. So the Chinese mainland accept the Panama's suggestion and decide to set up diplomatic relationship with Panama.
Let's hear first-hand account and comments from Joanna Lei, who's standing by on the phone in Taipei. Hello, Joanna. What do you make of the immediate response from Taiwan, local media in particular? Was there a panic there?
Well, yes, Marie. Of course, the original expectations were broken, so the initial reaction was one of shock and awe. All the official statements made by the current administration expressed deep regret, also reaffirmed the administration's strong commitment to uphold the best interests of the people in Taiwan. And that is quite common in terms of diplomatic severance. And for Taiwan, I think the timing is quite surprising. They did not expect something coming at this particular point. But the trend towards greater or smaller international space has been observed and has been raised by different people within the current Taiwan administration. So the second response is, I told you so, I told you so. Some people started posting Facebook and other articles saying that we have seen this coming, and Taiwan government has to be careful in terms of how it deals with mainland China.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Perhaps I'll go back to you later on. Dr. Zhong, in fact, some policymakers in Taiwan may have got the feeling before the announcement of severing relations between Panama and Taipei,
yes,
that Panama failed to send its replacement after the previous ambassador, quote-unquote, his term expired in Taipei. Did that deliver a euphemism or a kind of a soft warning?
Maybe that should be regarded as a soft warning. Actually, even last year, the former legislator named Chu Yi in Taiwan has already warned Tsai Ing-wen that Panama will end or terminate its
But
diplomatic.
Tsai Ing-wen did visit Panama,
yeah.
the very first one after she took office. Anna, what do you think should be the response from Washington? Do you think Washington would prefer to be quiet? Or do you think the Trump administration may have been informed beforehand about the diplomatic maneuvers?
I would say expect a 3 a.m. tweet from Donald Trump saying, no. Actually, it's very significant from the U.S. side. Panama is our closest relationship down there. I mean, not only did we invade the thing and put Noriega in jail, but, I mean, our history down there is extremely complex because we were involved in the building and the financing. There's always been a very close connection. It's impossible for me to believe that given the number of military installations and intelligence that we have there that we didn't know this is coming. I think it's actually just a couple of things. One, the uncertainty that Donald Trump has kind of created throughout the region. Second, the reality that the Belt and Road Initiative and these types of events are really what's driving. This is a country that gets 80% of its GDP from trade and trade-related services. So you're talking about an enormous number. For the future of this 4 million person country, they have to go forward and look for the next best opportunity. And right now, what do you have? Chile joined the AIIB at the last meeting of regarding the Belt and Road Initiative. You had all of these countries, including from South America, going there. They do not want to risk losing their trade, especially with Brazil, which will at some point calm down and resume the kind of breadbasket role that they have had traditionally, and which China is more than willing to take up. So you start adding all these factors together. It's a very pragmatic decision. I know it falls in terms of politics as something important, but I really think this is the tipping point where you see this. There's only a handful of countries in the world that still recognize Taiwan. I don't know necessarily that it's a big victory lap to say that this country has recognized the inevitable and is going towards where it can eat.
Next, many observers would be watching out as to whether a domino reaction is likely to take place following Panama's latest maneuver to sever its relationship and official tie with Taipei. Now, let's take a look at the countries which cut diplomatic relations with Taiwan authorities since 2000. Panama's switching of relations leaves Taiwan with just 20 former diplomatic partners, 12 of which are in Latin America and the Caribbean. Perhaps we should not read too much into the diplomatic implications. What about the business stakes that China harbors at this moment in Central America? Panama has the most important canal, and that sets up the bridge between North America and South America. That might be the gate to our markets in many of the Americas. What do you think of the economic implications? After all, we haven't signed any bilateral investment treaty, BIT, with Panama to protect our legitimate businesses in the Caribbean region. What do you think of the other considerations about the driving force?
Yes, absolutely. In the last several years, the two sides' economic relationship has been evolving, and now there are altogether about $10 billion investment in Panama from China. So those investments should be legally protected. But the two countries did not enjoy diplomatic relationship, so this could not be perfectly protected. As for this reason, the two sides should set up diplomatic relationship to protect this kind of investment and to enlarge their trade volume.
Yes, indeed. A legal umbrella is badly needed to protect China's business stakes in the Caribbean region. Let me go back to Joanna. Joanna, do you foresee domino reactions from the remaining 20 countries, small in size? However, they are watching out, they are holding their breath, and they're going to figure out what should be done next. What's your take?
Certainly these are 20 separate bilateral relationships. However, we are holding our breath because there are clear domino effects that could be expected from Central and South America. In addition to being a major diplomatic tie, Panama also signed FTA with Taiwan. It's a major trading post as well as economic bridge point to the Americas. So lots of people have forewarned the current government to make sure that even though they promise to maintain status quo across Taiwan Strait, status quo seems to be very difficult and under challenge. The economic future of the people in Taiwan is also under siege. So people are holding their breath and hopefully the domino will not fall.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Gambia, San Tome Principe switched diplomatic relations from Taipei to Beijing. Nigeria expelled Taiwan's commercial representative from its capital. Fiji closed its representative office in Taipei. What's going to happen next? Do you think the mainland is clearly aware that too much pressure would force Tsai Ing-wen to go radical, and that'll be counterproductive of what we want to achieve?
What will Chinese mainland do in next step? It totally depends on what will Tsai Ing-wen do for her cross-strait policy. If she could adjust her cross-strait policy fundamentally, then maybe Chinese mainland will become much restricted.
What do you mean fundamental switch in
I mean
DPP
just
attitude?
to accept 1992 consensus and at least to abandon Taiwan independence party clause.
But in her inaugural address,
she can't do that. Her party, she was the party that
But
said we
at least
can't. I understand
Yeah.
this is a solution, but it's politically impossible.
well, in her inaugural address 1 year ago, she said she would basically comply with the spirit of the so-called
ROC's
constitution and to use the regulations governing behavior of the people across the Taiwan Strait as the document, legal document. And that seems to be incomplete examination paper. Do you think before the 19th National Congress of the CPC Central Committee, 19大, do you think Tsai Ing-wen is aware that she's urged politely by the mainland to finish the examination? You guys give a pause.
Okay. Well, the whole point is she's not going to do that. She can't politically. She was from the party that said, no, we don't want this. If she does that, she'll be repudiated. Her economic strategies aren't working. The only thing she has is her nationalist card. She can either play this as a victim, a martyr, say, look, China's ganging up on me, and appeal to the international community to help and support her. I don't know that that will do anything, especially with Donald Trump saying, increasingly, I won't protect you unless you pay me. This is going to fall on deaf ears. So sorry. Now, from her perspective, remember, there's always two. She thought that she was playing it very, very carefully, and that by doing so, she could thread the needle between her interests, the interests of her party, and Beijing. Obviously, it was not enough for Beijing.
But maybe this is the last chance for Tsai Ing-wen. If she refuses to adjust her cross-strait policy, for his double 10 speech, 双十讲话, maybe she will have no chance, as the Chinese, as you said, 19大 will be held in November. Maybe there is no time for her.
You mean President Xi Jinping is likely to draw a very tough red line in the keynote presentation of the 19大, the 19th National Congress of the CPC, to give a very serious warning to DPP in Taiwan. Look, here is our red line. If you still refuse to accept the One China principle, we're going to increase tremendously the pressure on the Taiwan economy and to further squeeze the breathing space of Taiwan's diplomacy?
Well, you can use a carrot or a stick or a little bit of both. I tend to think that with 10% of the employed population working in China, with the amount of trade that goes in, 40% of their GDP, I don't see the urgency that is necessary to throw threats at them. Quite frankly, they have to come to the realization themselves that a relationship with China is inevitable unless they can move their island, which they can't. So I tend to think that China will be further ahead internationally and also in terms of coming back together with Taiwan if they have strategic patience.
There must be very quiet policy debates within academic circles and policy-making circles in mainland about what should be done next, whether we should have a further integration economically with Taiwan or we would use big stakes instead of carrots to let Tsai Ing-wen understand our real concerns about the future of Taiwan. Stay with us. We'll be back in a short while. Houtao, here is a prophecy that was first made by William Perry, former Secretary of Defense from the United States. He said there's no future for Taiwan. Look at economic integration between the two sides. And I also remember what Mr. Zhang Zhijun, head of the State Council Taiwan Affairs Office, said a few months ago. The end of the Taiwan independence movement would be reunification.
Yes.
What does he mean? I mean, this sounds pretty philosophical, doesn't it?
Yes, it sounds quite philosophical, but actually it represents the reality. That means if the Tsai Ing-wen administration go much further on its Taiwan independence clause, according to its Taiwan independence clause, maybe the Chinese mainland will hasten its speed on reunification. But if Tsai Ing-wen just could accept 1992 consensus, maybe the two sides could maintain the so-called status quo.
And let's stretch our imagination a little bit beyond what we are talking about, the immediate future, whether Tsai Ing-wen will hand over a more satisfactory examination paper to the mainland about the One China principle or not. Let's look at what's going to happen in the far future, in the foreseeable future, not exactly foreseeable future. Taiwan is a bipartisan democracy. And Tsai Ing-wen emphasized over and over, very much like her predecessors, we have to be subject to the popular will of the 23 million Taiwanese constituents. And the State Council Taiwan Affairs Office also said 1 year ago, we were aware of the bipartisan democracy there. And therefore, are we ready to exercise proper governance should the return of Taiwan be made possible in the remote future?
Well, I noticed you made almost a slip there and said Hong Kong. and the situations are very similar. I mean, there are people who were apart from mainland China who think of themselves in terms of a separate identity. I think a lot of the issues with Taiwan are psychological in terms of the way that they perceive themselves. They checked many years ago, if you asked somebody 30 years ago, what are you? They'd say, I'm Chinese. They wouldn't say, I'm Taiwanese. Taiwanese were the locals who were there. Many of the people who came in, much of the population came in during the Kuomintang, fleeing to the island. So they always differentiated themselves from the local, quote, Taiwanese. So, as I said, over time, that has happened. It'll take time to come to some sort of realization. The fact is that every group in China, when they come from a province, they're always very say, oh, I come from this province, I'm Shanghainese, I'm not like them. There's this ability to maintain a very strong separate identity, even though you're part of one China. And this, I think, is both necessary for Hong Kong and also Taiwan. The inevitability of the economics is very compelling. If you need markets, and Taiwan is a trading nation, they need markets. They don't have lots of resources, so I don't know that there's any place to go. But on the other hand, telling a girl while you're courting her, inevitably you will marry me, is not, let us say, perhaps the best strategy.
Let me go back to what you said about the slip of tongue. July the 1st will be the anniversary of Hong Kong's return, 20th anniversary of Hong Kong's return this year. And also, President Bush Jr. had a slip of tongue using crusade against Iraq, and he was very quickly corrected. So that means we're going to have a similar crusade. Don't forget, little pinks in their millions undertook a crusade against the pro-secession DPP right after Tsai Ing-wen took office. And her Facebook account was invaded by the little pinks, what we call patriotic young men from the mainland. So the slip of tongue may somehow indicate the genuine mindset of a majority in the mainland. Look, we are pressing the deadline. You got to give us a clear-cut attitude about the One China principle. Otherwise, we don't dismiss the possibility, Houtao, I wonder if you agree with me, that a red line will be drawn by the policy document of the 19th National Congress of the CPC. What's your take?
Yes, I totally agree with you. Just as I said, our bottom line is one China principle. And the deadline, I think, just my personal view, is the 19th Party Congress. So I think there are still several months for Tsai Ing-wen to change her cross-strait policy. In this coming several months, maybe she could, I think she could be wise enough to change that policy.
Let's look at the economic perspective. Tsai Ing-wen adopted the new southbound policy, meaning encouraging tourists from South Asia and Southeast Asia to come to Beijing instead of relying on the mainland for much of the revenue coming from the tourism industry. However, her approval rating has fallen from 50% to about 30%. That showcases, of course, the embarrassing situation about the poor economic performance of the island. What's your therapy for the current dilemma of Tsai Ing-wen?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, she needs to make peace with China and Beijing. And the question is, on what terms does it have to be a full, she has to kowtow in front and say, look, I'm sorry, I should have done this or things. Hopefully there's a middle ground where she can not lose too much face and Beijing can be satisfied, because it's a political situation. There's no way around the economics. You just expressed it. She's losing traction. She's going to lose the next election. The question is, how far can she go in terms of making this right?
It's a little bit too early to foresee that she will lose the next election.
30% approval ratings.
What do you think of her possibility of surviving the next election 3 years from now?
It depends. It's a future trend. If Tsai Ing-wen could maintain its approval rating for about 30%, maybe it's a high possibility for her to succeed in the next presidential
There's no
election.
question about the poor performance economically of Tsai Ing-wen over the past year. However, what matters really is the extremely appallingly poor performance of the KMT, the opposition party. Look at the struggling internal struggle for leadership within the KMT. Hong Xiuzhu lost. She only won 19%, whilst Wu Dunyi, a favorite successor by Ma Ying-jeou, won over 50 support from within the KMT. However, membership morality, membership loyalty is seriously questioned at this moment. The morale has dropped to a historic low. Yes. What's going to happen next?
I think next, KMT, maybe some members within KMT maybe will decide to go out, maybe to take part in the People First Party, Qimingdang, or to the new party, Xindang. But most the KMT supporters will continue to be with KMT, and I think the biggest challenge for the new leader of KMT, Wu Dunyi, is to unify KMT, and the basis is just to uphold its party spirit. That is one China, and actually that is the biggest difference between KMT and DPP. If Wu Dunyi lose this basis, or he does not uphold one China policy, then maybe KMT will become much similar to DPP.
Let's take a close look at the two defining moments for both Tsai Ing-wen and Wu Dunyi, the newly elected leader of KMT. Tsai Ing-wen might use the October 10th National Day, quote-unquote, of Taiwan to deliver a policy speech about what's left of the examination paper. And Wu Dunyi might use July the 7th, the day when the Second World War really broke out between Japan and China during the Second World War to deliver a speech about how he really looks at the One China principle. So in both cases, Anna, do you think it's up to Taiwan to decide the future?
Well, it is, but I think a lot of it's demographics. I mean, when you're talking about these things, you're talking about the people who are leaving the KTMT in droves are the young people, and they're going to be the future. If you start looking at the demographics of the country, clearly these people are going to be in control. And if they have no faith in her ability to get them jobs, which was a lot of the reason that she got in the last time, it wasn't necessarily all about patriotism or China. It was about jobs and the lackluster performance. If that doesn't change, she's out.
Yeah, how to appeal to the mind and heart of the younger generation would remain a big issue.
Yeah.
However, Houtao, don't you think there's a quiet evolution from pinning our hope on the future of Taiwan's electorate to ourselves? We get stronger. If we get very strong, we become the superpower economically and militarily 50 years from now, Taiwan is no issue at all. It will definitely come back. The issue is how to exercise our governance in Taiwan, the democracy there. What do you think of this change from relying on a solution in Taiwan itself to ourselves getting stronger and stronger so that the policy and strategy of integrating Taiwan will really pay off?
Yes, there is a change for Chinese mainland policy towards Taiwan. About 50 years ago, the Chinese mainland just called for we rely on the Taiwan Authority, and then we rely on KMT, and then we rely on Taiwan common people. But now, in 2015, President Xi Jinping said we should rely on ourselves. If we become much stronger, then we could become much appealing. Then maybe more Taiwanese would like to work to study in Chinese mainland, and then the two sides will be integrated, and finally will lead to the final reunification.
Do you think this is wishful thinking for peaceful integration economically?
No, that's exactly what I say about strategic patience. The ball is on your side. I mean, China is quickly becoming middle class, and that will be a lot easier for Taiwan, which is slowly going down, and China, which is quickly going up. They'll meet as middle-class individuals. It'll be a lot easier to identify with each other. It was a shock when lots of poor Chinese came flooding into the area, and people saw them as quite different. But when you start having people who they censor have the same kind of educational and outlook and hopes and things like that.
But I'm afraid we'll have
easier.
to sign the peace treaty with Taiwan. Otherwise, the two sides are in theory still at war. And there's no end to the civil strife that took place between 1945 and 1949. At the same time, I don't think missiles will be removed from the mainland. Missiles in the hundreds targeting Taiwan as a deterrence. That's something that the Taiwanese authorities find it very difficult to accept. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.